Hi there, my name's Elizabeth and I like to sew smart, and today I'm sewing smart for Christmas. I'm going to teach you how to sew this nice little Christmas quilt. It is sewn, although it's square, it's sewn row by row diagonally, and it's simple and you can choose any Christmas colour you like, and I'll show you now how that comes together and how we can begin. The quilt does look very complicated, but in actual fact it's really easy. And to make the squares to begin with, you will need, I needed 16 of these 3 strip squares, and I needed 9 of the plain squares. I've chosen the little holly thing. I haven't made them just ordinary like homespun or anything. And then you will need some 8-inch squares of background fabric, which you're going to cross cut to make the triangles on the corners. Now, to make these squares, you need 3 strips right across the fabric of something Christmas that coordinates nicely. I chose this because I had it. Try and work out of your cupboard if you can. It uses up a lot of scrap. You could do them all different if you wanted, but you should get 8 squares across 3 strips. So you'll need 2 lots, and then you'll have your 16 squares. So I've stitched along my strips all the way along using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All you need to do to make that square is line it up on your board, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put your little square ruler on it, and cut, and that will be a 5-inch square. Now you can find sometimes that it might just be over the 5-inch. That actually is pretty good actually, but if it's a little bit over, trim it off. You want them really square for this. Just trim that piece off, turn it around, and that's good. So now you have the sewn square, the strip square, and they're just the plain 5-inch squares. And then when you've cross-cut your background squares into 4, that's how you begin. Now, instead of working across the way as we normally do, we're going to work diagonally. So we're going to do, that's a corner which we will initially leave. This is our first row, this one here. So if we take the green, and then we're going to stitch onto the green 2 triangles. This one will be stitched onto the top. That makes your first square diagonally. And then we're going to lay out the second row and the third row and so on right to the bottom. It's really easy to put together, and you will need, for your border, your first border, you will need some 2-inch strips, and then your binding of course you will need as well. But layer each row out, and then you'll see how it fits. I will just lay another row out for you and come back. Do remember when you stitch your strips together to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then when you cross cut them they must measure 5 inches square. Just remember you need to square them all up so that all your seams will join. So this is your second row according to the pattern, which is this one here. You've got those. Now the next row of course will have the green here, which will make that little framed look, and then you'll find there's some red framed look in the middle. So all you need to do, remember, is to use a 1/4 inch seam when you stitch your rows together. So pin them, stitch them, and press to the dark side. And then when you've done all your rows, I'll come back and show you how to put all the rows together. So I've stitched my rows together. You see each one, and now I haven't put the corner pieces on at the top and each side. I do them last. The reason for that is the triangles are bigger because they need to have seam allowance in when you fit them. So I always leave the 4 corner ones until last. Now the next step is to stitch the rows together. So bring them up, each row, do a row at a time. Now here I press them mostly to the dark side. Occasionally you'll find one that won't go to the dark side. Now if you look here, show you this one, it's probably a bit easier for you to see. You need those 2 pieces to line up. So one seam on the back goes that way and the top one goes the other way. So when I pin them together and line them up, they will be absolutely perfect. And if you can't work out how to do that, I have a handy hint. It's number 15, about blocking your seams so that you get a really good join. So each row now, that will then come over there, go to the next row, I'll join that one, that one, that one right to the bottom, and then I will put the corners on. So I'll come back when I've done that. I've stitched all the lines together and pressed the seams in one direction so they all match up really nicely. Now to put the 4 corners on, remember my triangles are bigger than the square, so put them right sides together along there. But if you notice, because you've not got anything on, you've got those 2 little peak pieces there. Just take your cutter and just trim those down. Just trim them off. Oops. Just trim them off so that you've got a seam line that is nice and flat. Center your triangle as much as possible. You will have to cut it back in the finish, so what you're going to do now is pin that on there, sew it and press it out there. We need to be left, you see, with a 1/4 inch seam from our colour. So I'll just do all 4 corners now, trim off the little notches, right sides together with your triangle, pin and sew and press over. I've sewn on my corner squares and I now have squared all my quilt up. Now I know that my quilt is square because it is exactly 26¼ inches, this piece, both ways, and the other way that I make it square is I have measured from corner to corner, and that is 37¼ So I know that my quilt is nice and square. Now the next step I was going to do was I put borders on, but be sure when you actually choose Christmas fabrics, because they're red and green very often, you can make your quilt look very, very red before you put your border on, like so. It can look very red. If you put green on, it can also look very, very green. So you have to make a choice on whether you want to emphasize the red or the green. And I've just been looking at this, and because I haven't stitched it yet, I think I might just put my 4-inch border onto that and then bind with the red, and I think that balances it out much better. So because I know that I'm 26¼ inches both ways, I'm going to cut 2 pieces of this 4-inch fabric at 26¼ and I'm going to sew one on the right and one on the left. So I put my side borders on. I've again measured through my little quilt and I've cut 2 pieces, top and bottom, exactly that size, which I'll now put on the top and the bottom. And remember, when you do, you must measure through at several points to make sure that you keep it square. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to pin on there and machine that piece on to there. So I put my top and bottom borders on now. My quilt is nice and square. I haven't obviously put binding on because I will do that when I sandwich this and finish the quilt off altogether, but for today I'm just making the top. Now you have a choice. You can put your red in or your green in as you like, but I've left it like this. And remember that this can be made into any size. All you have to do is increase the number of squares on your top, and it will make, this one is going to be made as a gift with probably a tin of Christmas cookies or something in a basket for somebody for Christmas, and you can make it just the same or larger, whichever you choose. I hope you've enjoyed this Christmas project, and remember to give us a thumbs up and subscribe because it does help us, and visit the Etsy shop if you'd like to have the pattern for this, and there's lots of other patterns in the Etsy shop as well. And I hope you'll join me next time when we're going to do another Christmas project.